Well, welcome back to our Sunday conversation here on Big Country Politics as we now transition to our next guest, Dr. Paul Fabrizio, Professor of Political Science at McMurry University. Dr. Paul, this is 'tis the season for us. You know, our folks on Friday nights, they get the taste of football. This is kind of our Super Bowl on Tuesday nights.
It sure is. It sure was. It was quite a night.
Indeed. Well, tell me, the emotions from what you were able to witness from both sides on Tuesday night, put words to that. I mean, because there was a lot that was kind of riding on this election. As we've talked about, as the politicos have said, you know, this is the most important election of our time. Put words to that.
Yeah, first on the part about the most important election, we have heard that for every election since 1992. So that's getting a little old.
Sure.
Okay? I'm not denying that this was a very important election at the same time. What we saw was a historic thing. We saw probably the greatest political comeback in modern American politics with the presidency of Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. That was, when you think about what he has been through, the two impeachments, the January 6th, the indictments, the criminal convictions that he has, and then coming back, 2 assassination attempts on him, and he wins the presidency with what looks like a majority of the American people, something that no Republican has achieved since 2004. So it's been 20 years, 5 elections since we've had a Republican win a majority. This is a very, very historic thing. It's one of those things that people are going to be studying, historians are going to be crucially examining forever.
Yeah. Speaking of examining data and just this whole election, pollsters, you know, they said that this was the majority were saying it was 50-50. The tail of the tape was saying it was going to come down to the wire, but Trump swept the battleground states and really took this election handily. What happened to the polls?
There's going to be criticism of the polls, and I accept that as someone who has done survey research before. I really am not going to be too critical of them. Instead, I want to say this. The polls all have a margin of error.
Sure.
And what took place on Tuesday night was within that margin of error. So the polls all said it was going to be close. It was essentially a tie. But with the margin of error, you know, 48-48 is what we went into with some of the polls. Well, that means with the 3% margin of error, a 3-point margin of error, it could have been 51-45. Mm-hmm. Turns out that may not be far from where we ended up.
Sure.
So it was within the margin of error. So it was actually a credible account for the polls. They caught something. We didn't talk about it, but it was with a possibility. I went into it thinking that one of the scenarios in this was that Harris would do really, really well at the last minute. The last minute deciders would go for her. Another scenario was that Trump would do really well at the last minute, as those people who make up their mind at the last minute go for him. Mm-hmm. Those were all possible scenarios with the polls that we had. And it turns out that's what happened. The last minute deciders went for Trump. The last minute deciders are not captured in the polls. And so we saw the result.
Interesting. When we really look at this, I don't think all of America has conservative beliefs, or they're all members of the GOP. Obviously, based on past elections, that's not the case. But do you think, perhaps maybe, that Americans are probably they just had enough of Democrat policy?
I think that's a logical conclusion to this election. I think we have to start with Americans historically have been a center-right kind of thing. So we as a country are moderate, but we're moderately conservative, okay? And so what happened is a reflection of that in this election, where the country moved right after we've had a center-left presidency. What stands out to me, and I think this was obvious in the exit polls, was how much the Americans were just tired of what was going on in this country. Something like 30% were angry, 40% were dissatisfied, and 60%, almost 60%, did not approve of our current president. Kamala Harris, as vice president, did not separate herself enough from Joe Biden and his policies, so she paid the price. Donald Trump, we have to admit, is a genius at marketing. Mm-hmm. And he sold himself to the American public as the answer for their grievances. And on top of that, he shared those grievances. If you're angry at the way government is going, if you're angry at the fact that the world seems chaotic, Donald Trump said, I am too. And that ability to connect to the American people, combined with the fact that we're basically moderate to conservative, I think sealed this election.
Senator Bernie Sanders, who is of the left, he's
Yes.
a Democrat, he said that the Democrat Party was out of touch with the working class. How do Democrats bounce back from this election?
That is a really good question, and nobody knows the answer. The Democratic Party is engaged right now in a knife fight. They're going after each other, trying to assign blame. What the Democratic Party lacks right now is a leader. Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, they lost. They're going to be ushered off the stage. The Democratic Party is very unforgiving of people who don't do well. So they have to figure out what they stand for. And you're going to have people on the left, like Bernie Sanders, other people, AOC is another one, who are saying we need to move farther left. If that's their solution, the Democratic Party is only going to be worse off. So I don't think that's a solution they're going to come up with. They all know they have to find a way to reach modern American workers. Donald Trump has moved the Republican Party to make it the party of the working class. So if you're a Democrat, do you want to compete with them? Or do you want to say, no, we're going to be the party of the professional class, the business class? And that's a choice the Democratic Party has to make. And to be honest, I don't know what they're going to do. And you're asking me for directions, and I can't say, because the Democratic Party has an identity crisis right now, and they have to work that out. And they have to work it out in the context of the dominant political person in this country, Donald Trump, setting the agenda. And I'm not sure if the Democratic Party can do that. They have to, one other thing, they have to deal with the fact that the Democratic Party's name is not respected. The party has no footing in rural America. And if you look at the exit polls and where the votes were, it doesn't have much of a footing even in suburban America either. It's got a real problem. And so they've got to figure out who they are besides being anti-Trump.
In the aftermath of the election, you're seeing, the political talking heads on MSNBC, CNN, blaming white women, going after Hispanic men and black men because their vote did not go towards Kamala Harris. That's such an odd thing to do in the wake of that. How do you explain? I guess and this was for Hispanic men. It was the highest vote towards the GOP,
Republican, possibly ever.
Ever. How do you manage to explain that as somebody who really looks at this with a keen eye?
I think it's a mistake to blame the voters. Okay, even though smart politicians follow voters, so where are the voters interested, that sort of stuff, that's important. Smart politicians also figure out ways to get in front of voters as they're moving in a direction. The Democratic Party failed to do that, Donald Trump did. So I think the wrong thing to do is look at the voters Instead, look at yourselves. How come the Republicans were able to achieve what they achieved? How come the Democrats and their messages did not work? So that's really, to me, the issue. The Trump campaign, it was Donald Trump's best campaign he's ever had. It was his best organized. It was his most disciplined. Donald Trump as a candidate was sometimes disciplined, sometimes not. But Kamala Harris had a great campaign. You know, when we look at campaigns, we're going to say she did so many things right, but her message, her positioning on issues was not right for these times. And so that's really what you have to go after. What did we do as campaigns? What did we do as candidates that failed to reach the voters?
It appears that the GOP is going to retain control of the House. It has gained control of the Senate and now the presidency. Tell me, explain this, you know, and for the talking heads and for the folks that don't want to, for the far left, that they only see, oh, it's going to be a total annihilation of democracy. But is it? I mean, what do you envision? How do you see this kind of playing out for the GOP with control of those three main portions of government?
And I think you have to add to that control of the Supreme Court as well.
Indeed, yes.
Okay.
Exactly right.
So what you have is one party controlling the three branches of government right now. And I think what we're going to see at the beginning, maybe not a honeymoon period, but a time when the Republicans are going to work with each other to try to accomplish some of Donald Trump's objectives. On the first day, if you list all the things that he promised is going to happen, he had 41 things he is going to do on the first day. Okay, so they're going to have a busy list of things that they're going to work with. What I think we're going to see as reality sets in, wars in the Middle East, wars in Ukraine, President Trump implementing his trade policies, etc., I think we're going to start seeing internal tensions in the Republican Party starting for them to go after each other. All we have to do to get an idea of what's might happen is look at the Texas legislature, where Republicans are in control, but Republicans fought like cats and dogs over various issues. The Texas House stood for some things, the Texas Senate stood for others. They went after each other. They did not succeed in accomplishing so many of their objectives. And this is what I see is going to happen in Washington, D.C. The Republican Party is going to tear at itself over the objectives that Donald Trump lays out. And I don't see them being that successful in passing them all. Instead, I see the internal tensions just ripping things apart.
What do you think Donald Trump means for the oil and gas industry, since it's kind of been on a cap with the Joe Biden administration? How do you think this plays out for these guys here moving forward?
Okay, first, I'm going to go against conventional wisdom here. The oil and gas industry has been incredibly productive. It's been at its most productive. We are producing more oil and gas than we've ever produced. So the idea that there's a cap, I think, is a little bit spurious. I have some issues with that. Are we at a cap because of the Biden administration, or are we at that cap because of the price of oil and also the ability of us to come up with enough workers and money to develop further the resources that we have in West Texas? So I'm not sure that Donald Trump's drill, baby, drill philosophy is actually going to translate into that much more activity out in West Texas. Because my sense is that the industry is doing exactly what it can do now, given the market conditions of the world and the limitations on just finding enough workers. So I don't see freeing up spaces in various places in national parks, national monuments. easing environmental regulations. I don't see that making that much of a difference. I mean, so you produce more oil, what's going to happen? The price is going to drop. Do you really want the price to drop that much more? Do we want oil to go back to $1 a gallon? Gasoline to go to $1 a gallon? I'm not sure. So I've watched the oil industry and I haven't bought some of the stuff that they've been saying.
As far as getting oil from foreign countries, I think Venezuela has been one of those, and of course, members of the GOP, they said, "Oh, it's just dirty oil, and it comes from some of the worst hands in the world." Do you think that comes to an end, and they're finding more ways to drill stateside in America?
I would argue that the oil industry is one of the last bastions of free enterprise in the world. Despite the regulations, it exists in the world, and the producers, the consumers are going to look for the best price, the best product, regardless of the politics of it. And so they're going to produce all that they can sell within the context of a larger market. And if I'm an oil executive and I need oil and it's cheaper in Venezuela than it is in West Texas, well, I'm going to go to Venezuela and get that oil.
So it doesn't matter.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that we're going to see that much change in the oil industry with the presidency of Trump. That's really what is, when you look at what was accomplished with a hostile presidency of Joe Biden, where we're producing more than we ever have, why should we think that the president really makes that much difference? Okay, it's a worldwide market. You have to respond to worldwide economic conditions.
Sure. Dr. Fabrizio, it's been real, it's been fun. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you. And if I'm wrong, you're going to bring me back here and let me know about that oil stuff too.
100%. We'll time code it all. So
okay,
we'll
very good.
This here, we'll have to have another conversation probably here in another few months at this point, kind of revisiting some of these things and seeing where we're at. Because for some, it could be good that you're wrong in some of these things, or vice versa. So, but it's always interesting to hear your take on things, and just because of the wisdom that you've seen with politics over the many years.
I'm not sure it's wisdom, but thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Well, for Dr. Paul Fabrizio, Professor of Political Science at McMurry University, I'm Manny Diaz. This has been another Sunday Conversation right here on Big Country Politics. We'll see you next time. God bless.